Picture a low wooded hill in the middle of what is now Putnam County, Georgia, and picture a person kneeling on the bare ground with a piece of white quartz in their hands. They set it down. They reach for another, and they do this by every reasonable estimate tens of thousands of times, until the stones fan out into the unmistakable body, head, and spread wings of an enormous bird. The figure measures roughly 102 feet from head to tail and about 120 feet across the wings. And here is the thing that has quietly troubled everyone who has ever stood at its edge. From the ground, you cannot see the bird. You see a scattered field of pale rock. You see a low mounded pile. The shape, the actual creature, only resolves when you climb high above it from an angle the builders had no way to reach. There were no aircraft, no nearby cliff of the right height. So they built a form for a viewer who was not standing where they stood. That is the first line of this story, and it pulls in two directions at once. On one side, there is the sheer physical labor of the thing. This was not a quick offering. This was thousands upon thousands of hand-carried stones, quartz that geologists say does not naturally occur in a heap on that exact hilltop, meaning it had to be gathered and moved. On the other side, there is the total silence around its purpose. No inscription, no surviving explanation from the hands that made it. Just the bird, and the strange fact that it was designed to be seen from above. So the central question of this whole video is this: why would a people pour that much effort into a shape that no living person among them could ever fully see? Was it built for the eyes of the sky? For something they believed watched from overhead? Was it a marker, a boundary, a burial monument, a calendar, a gathering place? Or is the answer something quieter and more human that we have simply lost because the people who knew it are gone and left no words behind? To get anywhere near an answer, we're going to do this carefully. We will look at who actually lived on this land and what we know about the mound-building cultures of the American Southeast. We will look at the second effigy, the one almost no one talks about, sitting only a few miles away. We will weigh the geology of the quartz, the dating problem that makes archaeologists deeply uncomfortable, the burials found beneath the stones, and the oral traditions of the peoples whose ancestors may have knelt on that hill. And we will be honest all the way through about where the record stops and the guessing begins. Start with the land itself, because the land came first. Central Georgia, in the centuries before European contact, was not empty wilderness. It was home to a long, layered succession of indigenous cultures, some of the most sophisticated societies north of Mexico. Archaeologists group much of this under broad labels like the Woodland period and the later Mississippian period, and the dates matter here. The Woodland period in the southeast runs roughly from around 1,000 years before the Common Era to about 1,000 years into it. This is the era most researchers now associate with the rock eagle, though I want to be clear right away that the dating is one of the weakest, most argued over parts of the entire case, and we will come back to exactly why. These were not wandering bands scraping by. The people of this region built earthen mounds, some of them enormous over many generations. A little way south, at the site now called Okmulgee near Macon, there are great platform mounds and an earth lodge with a preserved clay floor that has been dated back well over 1,000 years. Further afield, the culture at Cahokia in Illinois raised a mound with a base larger than the Great Pyramid. So when we talk about the builders of Rock Eagle, we are not talking about people incapable of large, organized, deliberate construction. We are talking about people who moved earth and stone with real engineering intent, who coordinated labor across seasons, who built for reasons tied to their cosmology, their dead, and their sense of order in the world. And that is the part I want you to sit with, because there is an old and ugly habit, especially in the way American prehistory used to be told, of assuming the ancestors of native peoples could not have built the impressive things found on this continent. For a long stretch of the 19th century, there was a genuinely popular idea that some vanished, mysterious race of mound builders, distinct from Native Americans, had raised these structures and then disappeared. That idea has been thoroughly dismantled. The mounds and the effigies were built by the ancestors of the indigenous nations who were here when Europeans arrived. Holding on to that truth is not a footnote. It is the foundation of thinking about this site honestly. If you find yourself drawn to the places history textbooks mention in a single sentence and then hurry past, this is exactly the kind of channel that lingers there, and subscribing is what keeps these deeper stories coming. So here's what we're going to trace from here. We're going to look closely at the effigy itself, its construction, the quartz, the second bird nearby that changes the whole picture. We're going to confront the burials found underneath and what they may or may not tell us. We're going to weigh the skeptical explanations against the details that resist them, and we're going to end at the one honest place this story can end. Because the moment you start pulling the rock eagle apart, stone by stone, the simple answer, the one that says it is just an old grave marker and nothing more, starts to feel far too small for what is actually sitting on that hill. Let me show you what the effigy actually is when you get down close to it, because the reality is stranger and more deliberate than a photograph suggests. The bird is made almost entirely of milky white quartz, pieces ranging from fist-sized cobbles up to larger boulders, laid to form a raised mound in the outline of a bird with a rounded head, a distinct body, and two broad wings sweeping outward. The core of the body, where the mounded rock is thickest, rises to a height that has been measured at around 8 to 10 feet in places. This is not a thin outline scratched into the ground. It is a substantial pile of carefully placed stone, and the number of individual rocks involved runs, by conservative estimates, into the many thousands. Some accounts push toward the idea of a truly enormous count, and while I would be cautious about any exact figure, the visible mass of quartz makes clear this was an immense investment of gathering, carrying, and placing. Now think about the quartz itself, because this is where the effort becomes almost physical to imagine. Quartz is heavy. It does not compress or bind like earth. Each stone had to be selected, and the whiteness matters. White quartz stands out sharply against the red-brown Georgia soil, especially under sun or moonlight. Geologists who have looked at the site note that quartz of this type is found in the broader region, in veins and scattered deposits, but not conveniently piled on that specific hilltop in the quantity needed. Which means people went and got it, load after load, and brought it to this one rise and arranged it into a creature. And there is a second effigy. This is the part that so many casual retellings leave out, and it is the detail that, for me, breaks the story wide open. About 10 miles away, on another hill, sits a second stone bird, commonly called rock hawk. It is also built of quartz, also in the shape of a spread-winged bird, and by some measures it actually contains even more stone than the rock eagle. So we do not have a single, one-off oddity that could be dismissed as a quirk. We have two monumental stone birds, built of the same distinctive material, in the same style, within a short distance of each other. That is a pattern. That is a tradition. Whoever did this was working from a shared idea, a shared purpose, repeated across the landscape. One bird might be an accident of interpretation. Two birds, deliberately built, is a culture telling us something on purpose. Now sit with the design problem again, sharpened by everything we just laid out. The full form of each bird is only legible from above. On the ground, walking the mound, you experience a field of white stone and a raised pile. The bird resolves into a bird when you gain altitude, and these people had no altitude to gain in the way we can. So one of two things is true. Either the shape was meant for a viewer they believed existed above them, in the sky or the spirit world, or the making of the shape mattered more than the seeing of it, meaning the act of construction was itself the point, a ritual performed over generations whose completed form was addressed to something other than human eyes. Then there is what lies beneath. When the site was examined more closely, particularly during work in the earlier 20th century, investigators reported finding evidence associated with burial beneath portions of the stone. According to the accounts of that work, a burial and cremated remains were connected with the effigy, which is why one long-standing interpretation treats these as mortuary monuments, markers over the dead. And that is a reasonable, grounded reading. Mound cultures of the Southeast did bury their dead in and beneath raised structures. But here the record becomes harder to verify because the excavation standards of that era were not what they are now. Documentation was limited, and a single burial does not, on its own, explain why you would encode the whole thing as a bird visible only from the sky. A grave can be marked with a cairn. It does not need to be a 100-foot creature with anatomically arranged wings. And this is the exact point where the neat explanation cracks. If it is only a grave marker, why the wings? Why the head? Why two of them miles apart? Why the specific choice of white quartz hauled in from elsewhere when ordinary local stone or earth would have covered a burial just as well? Every practical answer we reach for keeps leaving a residue of unexplained intention. So the honest position, standing on that hill, is not that we have solved it. It is that the simplest solution keeps failing to account for the strangest and most consistent features of the thing. And that is where the real investigation begins. So let us do the skeptic's work properly, because it deserves to be done properly. The careful, cautious position among many archaeologists is roughly this. These are effigy mounds built by woodland period peoples, probably associated with burial and ceremonial use, part of a broader tradition of animal-shaped earthworks found across eastern North America. The bird form likely carried religious or clan significance. The above view legibility in this reading is not a mystery at all, but a natural byproduct. Once you decide to lay out a large symbolic figure on flat ground, of course it reads best from above, the way a drawing on paper reads best when you look straight down at it. The builders did not need to see the finished aerial shape. They knew the shape they intended. They laid it out using the ground plan in their minds, and the completed monument served its ceremonial and mortuary function regardless of whether anyone ever floated above it. Nothing supernatural required, nothing lost, just an ancient people doing something meaningful in their own frame of reference. And I want to be fair, that explanation is coherent, and it is probably closer to the truth than any wild alternative. The effigy mound tradition is real. Animal-shaped earthworks genuinely exist across the region, most famously the Great Serpent Mound in Ohio, a quarter-mile-long earthen snake. The idea that people laid out large symbolic figures for ritual reasons is well-grounded. So we are not dealing with something that defies explanation entirely. We are dealing with something that partial explanations keep touching without fully closing. But here is where it is not so simple. Start with the dating, because this is the quiet scandal at the center of the whole site. We do not actually have a firm, agreed-upon date for when the rock eagle was built. Stone effigies are extraordinarily hard to date. There is no organic charcoal layered cleanly beneath undisturbed rock the way there might be under an earthen mound. Radiocarbon dating needs organic material in secure context, and a pile of quartz offers almost none. Estimates for the rock eagle range widely, with common figures placing it somewhere in the vicinity of a couple of thousand years old, tied loosely to the woodland period. But you will also find far more cautious researchers admitting the true range could be considerably broader. When the age of a monument is uncertain by many centuries, our confidence about who built it and why has to shrink accordingly. We are interpreting a structure whose very date we cannot pin down. Then there is the material choice, which the standard explanation tends to wave past. Why quartz? Earthen effigy mounds elsewhere were built of soil, which is far easier to move and shape. Building a large figure out of hauled quartz cobbles is dramatically more laborious. And the quartz is white. In a culture that left us no writing, the deliberate selection of a bright, reflective, hard stone carried in from a distance is itself a statement. White stone catches light. Under a full moon, a field of quartz glows. Whatever this was for, the builders chose a material that would be visible, luminous, and permanent when easier options existed. That choice pushes against the idea of a purely practical grave cover. Now weigh the two-bird problem against the skeptic again. If these were simply local burial markers, we would expect variety, scattered forms reflecting whoever happened to die and be honored. Instead, we get two large birds, same material, same basic posture, within 10 miles. That consistency implies a shared cosmological program, a regional idea about birds and the sky and the placement of these monuments on high ground. Birds, in many southeastern indigenous belief systems, carry deep meaning as messengers between the earthly world and the upper world, the realm of the sky and the sun. A bird of stone, on a hilltop, built to face the sky, fits that symbolic logic with almost uncomfortable precision. And to the peoples who held those beliefs, this was not decoration. It was cosmology made physical, a piece of the sacred order set into the earth. So notice what happens when you line up the honest facts. The date is genuinely uncertain. The material was deliberately and laboriously chosen for visibility and permanence. There are two of them, not one, forming a pattern. The form is a bird, an animal loaded with sky-world meaning, and the whole design privileges the view from above, the very direction associated with that upper world. None of these facts, alone, forces a mysterious conclusion. The skeptic can absorb each one individually, but stacked together, they make the flat, dismissive reading that this is just an old grave with a decorative outline feel thinner and thinner. We are left holding a monument whose builders clearly meant far more than we can currently read, and whose intended audience, whatever they believed, seems to have been looking down from the sky. And there is one more layer almost nobody brings into the discussion, and it is the one that sharpens everything else. It is the voices of the people whose ancestors actually lived on this land. Because for a long time, the study of rock eagle proceeded almost entirely as an outside exercise, surveyors and archaeologists measuring stone, while the oral traditions of the region's indigenous nations sat to one side, treated as legend rather than evidence. And that, in a place like this, is a mistake. The homeland of central Georgia in the historic period belonged to the Muskogee, the people often called the Creek, whose ancestors are among the inheritors of this long, mound-building world. When the Muskogee were forcibly removed from their Georgia and Alabama homelands in the 1830s, along the route that became known as the Trail of Tears, they carried their traditions with them. And within southeastern indigenous cosmology, broadly speaking, the world is understood in layers, an upper world associated with the sky, order, and the sun, a lower world associated with water and the underneath, and the middle world where people live in between. Birds, especially great birds and raptors, are creatures of the upper world. They cross between the human realm and the sacred one above. Now look back at the effigy with that in mind. A bird, built of luminous white stone. Placed on high ground, constructed so that its true form addresses the sky. If you were a people who understood a great bird as the being that carried messages to the upper world, and you wished to make an offering, a marker, a point of contact between your world and the realm above, what would you build, and how would you orient it? You might build exactly this, a stone bird whose completed shape is a gift laid open to the sky, not to the people standing beside it. In that framework, the fact that no one on the ground can see the whole bird stops being a puzzle. It becomes the entire point. It was never meant for you. It was meant for what looks down. This is the turn, and I want to be very careful and very honest here, because this is precisely where our channel refuses to cheat. I am not telling you that a surviving Muskogee text explains the rock eagle in these exact words. That specific, documented, one-to-one account does not exist that I can point you to with certainty. What I am telling you is that the general cosmology, the layered world, the sacred status of birds as sky messengers is well attested across southeastern indigenous traditions, and that this cosmology fits the physical evidence of the effigy with a coherence that the flat grave marker theory simply cannot match. That is not proof, it is convergence. Two independent kinds of evidence, the stone in the ground and the structure of belief carried by voice through generations, leaning toward the same reading. And notice how the pieces now connect. The uncertain date told us we are looking deep into the woodland world, a world we know was rich with cosmological building. The deliberate white quartz told us visibility and permanence mattered, that this was meant to endure and to shine. The two birds told us this was a repeated, regional, shared idea, not a one-off. And the oral cosmology tells us what a bird on a hilltop facing the sky would have meant to the people most likely to have built it. Each piece alone is deniable. Together, they describe not a random pile of stone over a grave, but a purposeful act of connection between the earthly world and the sky above, made physical, made permanent, and addressed upward, which narrows us to one honest, unresolved possibility that historians and archaeologists have circled for decades without landing on: that the rock eagle is not primarily a marker for the living at all. That it is a message or an offering or a point of contact built for the upper world by people who genuinely believed something was watching from above and who wanted to be seen by it. And once you allow that reading, you cannot walk that hilltop the same way again, because every stone becomes a word in a sentence we can no longer fully read, addressed to a listener we can no longer name. So what can we actually say after all of this, standing back from the whole thing? Here is where the evidence leads, laid out plainly. The rock eagle and its companion rock hawk are almost certainly the work of indigenous peoples of the American Southeast, most likely during the woodland period, though the true date remains genuinely uncertain and honest researchers admit it. They were built with enormous, deliberate effort out of white quartz carried from elsewhere in the form of great birds on high ground, oriented so that their full shape reads from above. And the most coherent explanation, the one that accounts for the most features at once, is that these were sacred constructions tied to a cosmology in which birds crossed between the human world and the upper world of the sky. That resolves the tension we started with. The old legend, if we can call the oral cosmology that, and the physical monument are not in conflict. They are describing the same thing from two directions. The belief system tells us birds are sky messengers and the upper world looks down. The stone tells us someone built a giant bird designed to be seen from above. The reason no person on the ground can see the whole effigy is not a flaw in the design and not a puzzle to be explained away. It is the design working exactly as intended, because the intended viewer was never on the ground. Think back through the trail. The two birds, not one, telling us this was a shared program and not an accident. The luminous quartz, chosen over easier materials, telling us visibility and permanence were the goal. The burials beneath, telling us the dead and the sacred were bound together here. The uncertain date, forcing humility. And the layered cosmology carried by voice, telling us what a stone bird facing the sky would have meant. No single one of those proves the case. But laid side by side, they point in one direction with a consistency that is hard to dismiss. And I want to be fully honest about the limit because that is the whole point of doing this properly. We cannot prove the builder's exact intention. No inscription survives. No first-hand account tells us, in their own words, why they knelt on that hill and laid those stones. The specific ceremonies, the specific being they may have addressed, the exact meaning they held in their minds, these are gone. What we have is the physical fact of the monument, the framework of belief that surrounded the people most likely to have made it, and the striking fit between the two. That is enough to say with real confidence that this was sacred, purposeful, and oriented toward the sky. It is not enough to say we have read the message. We have only recognized that a message was sent. And that is the quiet weight of it. Not some lost race, not visitors from elsewhere, none of the easy fantasies that people reach for when they encounter something they cannot immediately explain. Something far more human and far more moving. A people who looked at the sky, believed something looked back, and spent a staggering amount of labor building a great luminous bird to speak to it, in a language of stone we have almost, but not quite, forgotten how to read. They were not primitive, they were reaching upward, deliberately, with everything they had. But the answer, real as it is not really where this story ends, because what the rock eagle asks of us now is not only what it meant then, but what it says about us, standing on that hill with our maps and our instruments, still unable to fully hear it. Maybe the real lesson of this quiet monument is about the gap between building something and understanding it. We can measure the rock eagle to the inch. We can count its stones, analyze its quartz, map its wings from the air the builders never reached. And still, the thing that mattered most, the meaning, the intention, the exact prayer it embodies, slips through our hands. Because that meaning did not live in the stone. It lived in the minds and the mouths of the people who made it, and when a way of knowing is not written down but carried by voice, it can be broken in a single generation of forced removal, of silence, of a language pushed aside. We are not looking at a mystery the builders left us on purpose. We are looking at the shape of what was taken, an outline where the words used to be, and that should change how we treat the traditions that did survive. For a long time, the oral knowledge of the peoples who lived here was set aside as legend while the stones were treated as data. But this site quietly shows that the stone and the story only make sense together. Neither one, alone, gives you the whole bird. It is worth remembering that the next time someone calls an indigenous tradition a myth, as if that word settles it, sometimes the myth is the missing half of the evidence. Think back to where we started, to that person kneeling on the hill, setting down one white stone and reaching for another tens of thousands of times, building a creature they would never see whole. We began by asking why anyone would pour that much effort into a shape.